All right, welcome back again to another episode of the Contrarians. This is another one of our regular shows. I mean, I was talking with Ralph before we hit record. I'm thinking, okay, well, I think we did the regular where we picked a favorite ZZ Top album, and that was me picking it, and I picked Rhythmine, which is an awesome choice that a lot of people are starting to love a little more. Tres Hombres usually wins this thing, but I'm not sure if we've done a worst ZZ Top album episode. I think we might have done one on
a copy of Rhythmine.
Yeah, there we go. So this is a regular one, but another person. So yeah, if we have done Rhythmine, we're going to be talking about a different album. Today, we've had Ralph on before. We've talked about, what have we talked about? Final Cut, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, Shaken and Stirred, Styx Cornerstone. You had Dennis call you up, and thank you for doing that one. That's really cool. But yeah, we're talking about ZZ Top today and Ralph's favorite ZZ Top album, El Loco. This is the album that came after they got their Warner Brothers deal, after being on Sleepy London Records. There we go. With the Motorhead Ace of Spades album art. So they got on with Warner Brothers for Deguello. This is kind of there's kind of two breaks. Oh, cool. That's an odd color for it, but
well, not really. But
so Deguello gave them a little bit of a boost. They went platinum with Deguello. It had a lot of hits on it, and ZZ Top. Everybody was loving ZZ Top again. But El Loco comes out and doesn't do quite as well. It's not that well received out there in the marketplace. The band sort of notices it. It only goes gold, which it did go gold pretty quickly. But it's a really odd one where you think, why is this album still gold? It doesn't make sense. They're not on one of these labels where where there's been bad certifying. So I think it's probably should be far beyond on gold on one reason, and then on others not. But I mean, basically Tube Snake Boogie, Pearl Necklace, and even 10-Foot Pole, you do hear them regularly on the radio. So I was quite surprised to see the Spotify numbers on playing a lot of these ZZ Top songs from this album are really low. Tube Snake Boogie has 7 million plays. Another one has 4 million plays, which is not very high in this world of Spotify numbers. And then everything else is down from there. So this album is not very recognized by the classic rock set, and possibly ZZ Top itself has had a little bit of a fade with this whole situation. But yeah, so this is produced by Bill Ham, sort of in name only. Terry Manning is sort of the, one of the secret weapons on this thing. It's, like I say, July 20th, 1981, which coincidentally, more or less lines up within a couple of weeks, I think, of MTV starting up. This won't be their big MTV album, but ZZ Top famously is one of the bands who really benefited from MTV. But that's when MTV as MTV had tons and tons of power about 2 years in, and ZZ Top a couple years after this album would break it wide open with a Diamond album, Eliminator, and then two others with very similar album cover art and kind of a similar oeuvre to them. So yeah, we are talking about El Loco, and I want to say Ralph's a little bit of an expert here. Ralph and I both worked with Banger Films on the movie. The Little Old Band from Texas, the documentary, but Ralph is the writer. Ralph and Sam were credited as the writers of that.
Credited. I wrote it.
Yes. And oddly enough, Ralph, this is really weird, but I am credited here and there as part of the writing team too. Although my official credit is story consultant, and I'm the lone story consultant, but I've seen my name under the writer thing, and obviously I'm not the writer. But we had a lot of fun meetings, picking the beats and all that stuff on it. But one interesting thing that has recently come up, that we can thank Ralph for actually on this. So ZZ Top actually just put out a live album called Raw. It's got kind of a neat album cover art and neat track listing. So it's basically ZZ Top has a new live album, and it's called like the the soundtrack album to the documentary. In a sense, that album would not have even happened had Ralph not come up with the idea and lobbied strongly for this idea that he wanted to have the band playing in some historic venue live. So we had brand new live footage to be used throughout the documentary, and that was Ralph championing that. And because he did that, that's why we can have this new live album with Dusty, of course, because Dusty was alive when this happened. But I don't know, Ralph, anything you want to add to that? And then I am going to turn it over to you and start talking about El Loco.
Yeah. In terms of writing, to borrow from the great Jerry Lewis, you're the writer when you face the tyranny of the blank page. And when it came to that ZZ Top doc, I was the only one who faced the tyranny of the blank page. And yes, it's true. I conceived of that whole raw jam, and I pitched it. Sam Dunn and I lived on Billy Gibbons' tour bus for 2.5 days, 3 days of very weird times. And I sat down with Billy and I pitched him the whole idea, and then later followed it up with the kind of a creative game plan for the film that he signed off on. So yeah, it was not surprising, but it kind of aggravating when you go on the ZZ Top website and Billy goes on blah blah about, the director Sam Dunn said to me, and it's like, that's not really how it happened at all. But ZZ Top's all about myth making, and that's not my memory, but I am pleased that, and the reason why I conceived of that, and you would know this, Martin, is that there wasn't a lot of footage of ZZ Top. So when you're putting a doc together and you're realizing that their manager / producer, Bill Ham, had kind of a written or unwritten rule about he wanted to preserve the myth and be very selective with how you could see them. He was a firm believer that bands should pay their money and go see them as opposed to see them on television. And I know he loosened the reins a little bit from time to time, but for the most part, the reason why I conceived that jam was so we could have material for the film to create. When I'm writing a doc, you need to create a spine for a film, someplace you can cut in and out of. And that's what was so great about that jam idea. And I'm not going to go into that crazy day that was that jam, and I'm sorry, Martin, that you weren't there for that, because
you've told me the stories, and I kind of wish you could tell them, but I also don't.
No, I don't have a lawyer, but let's just say it was a unique experience that, despite it being filmed, you really had to be there. You really had to be. It went over 5 or 6 hours, I think. Split up into 2 different parts, at least. There was some really wonderful stuff. There was, I always talk about this, they jammed on this Freddie King tune, and Dusty sang his ass off, and I really lobbied hard for that to be part of that, but it never surfaced. But, and there were certain things about it that kind of aggravated me, because one of the things I requested was that Frank, this is the way these things work without revealing too much of how the sausage is made. I really wanted it back to, my idea was, let's take a time machine back to 1971 as much as we could and have those guys just jamming in a circle. And a lot of that did come true. But one of the things that I wanted Frank to have his old, like an old Slingerland kit or something. None of the sort of fancy facade of the later era trigger drum kits that Frank used. And it was funny. So I sent that request into the ether, and what I got back was a no. Seemingly from Frank, said no. And then on the day of the jam, when they took that break, I took Frank aside. And I said, Frank, I really wanted you to have that old 5-piece kit with you, just to have that vibe again. He said, really? I said, you didn't hear about my request? Nope. I thought, oh, okay. Well, that's part and parcel of the vast machine that is the great ZZ Top. And El Loco, to me, is as my segue, but we can talk more about the movie, but is one of the great last, for me personally, it's their greatest last record, if that makes any grammatical sense. It's not only, I don't know if it's a contrarian choice, but it's my favorite record of theirs. And it's their last band album, as I define ZZ Top as a band. And we know the folklore past Eliminator, Dusty and Frank are marginalized for much of their recording career after El Loco. And I think that's why, in part, that this album has such charm, because it really is ZZ Top before the Lyndon Hudson, before all that. Although Lyndon is there, this DJ that Frank meets, I think, in the program. I'm not positive about that, and then he becomes a fixture, at least in the latter stages, I think, of El Loco, and then dominates Eliminator. And he's had his own, I think, struggles with getting recognition, which is a completely different story. And I wasn't able to use him in this movie, which was a drag. And Bill Ham, who I really wanted to talk to as well, passed away in the making of it. So I think that the film, to a point, suffers because of that. Those two voices not there, but hey, there's a lot of great stuff in there, and a lot of great visuals, and yeah. So,
all right. So why El Loco? Tell us more about this record.
All right. Well, the risk of aggravating people out there in the internet land because I love to contextualize. I love to, every record I love has an origin story, and for me, this is El Loco really starts with Tube Snake Boogie, grade 11. My buddy Peter Fruh, sort of two nerdy guys, and I think it was Peter who said to me, "Have you heard this song, Tube Snake Boogie?" And I guess I had, because we bonded on this song. And if you remember the fall of '81, yeah, there was Styx and Foreigner and Genesis later on, and Phil Collins. They were all lurking about in '81. But my memory of it was a year dominated by music that I thought was pretty heinous. Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, even something like Blondie, I didn't really respond to. So Tube Snake Boogie was entirely different in my mind at that point. And I remember that, being a kid, being frustrated with what was being played. And maybe in Toronto, which is where I lived and grew up, it got heavy airplay as opposed to some other markets. But for me, it was a really big song. And the thing about that song, which really set me on the course of loving El Loco, was it was really a funny song. It was really funny and strange, and again, for 15-year-old ears, and kind of sordid and a little bit forbidden in some of his lyrics. It was like the musical equivalent. When I was a kid, my dad would take me to the barber shop, and he would get his hair cut first. And as I waited, the barber, his name was Rocky, he had a whole, like a lot of barbershops, he had a whole bunch of Playboy magazines. And so as my dad would be getting his hair cut, I would sit and look at these Playboy. And Tube Snake Boogie was kind of like the musical equivalent of the Playboy magazine for a 15-year-old or 14-year-old. And it had all these funny double entendres that or sometimes, she won't do it, but her sister will, was fairly direct. And it had that novelty quality to it too, because I didn't really know ZZ Top back then. So it was a bit like The Streak or Convoy or Kung Fu Fighting or Mr. Jaws or any of those tunes, except that it was done clearly by a band, and a band that could really play. So in that sense, it was like the Knack. And there's no real equivalency between those two bands other than the Knack. Even then, My Sharona and songs like that, I knew these guys could obviously play. And that's what was also very exciting to Tube Snake Boogie. It was hooky. It had this great drum break, so it had a sense of dynamic to it, and two really interesting sounding guitar solos. And the funny thing is, I know I've said to you maybe even last week that I didn't like Boogie, But this kind of boogie I liked, because in the end, the song was so economical. It was only about 3 minutes long, and it jammed in these two great solos, so it wasn't Freebird. And it was just, it was funny and catchy. And plus, the other thing I have to say about it, when I was thinking back and I was ruminating on it, was Billy's voice was unlike anything I'd heard either. And it reminded me again, tangentially, of being 15 and hearing these new voices. And if you're hearing stuff like Kenny Rogers and whoever, more mainstream sort of MOR voices or new wave kind of voices, Billy Gibbons was from another planet to me. And kind of like Peter Gabriel, when I first heard Games Without Frontiers, I swore that guy, whoever was singing Games Without Frontiers, had to be in his 60s. He sounded so old and wise. And Billy didn't sound old and wise. He sounded old and funny. And, I couldn't believe it when I found out later he was a comparatively young guy. I think he was in his early 30s when he did that. But the thing about that song, and looking back, is it hit me just as my childhood was kind of fading and I was entering into young adulthood, and it came out before my voice dropped, before my armpit got stinky and all those things. And it was joyous and it was harmless, and it just really helped shape my impressions of what a good song was. And that's in retrospect, but I think about now, can you imagine a song like Tube Snake Boogie being written today? It would just never happen. It would be like grotesquely profane, or there'd be legions of people speaking out against it, even as tepid as some of the lyrical content of that is. But it's too bad, because for a young guy, when you're often, like I always talk about in these things, when you're angry or confused, it was a real nice bit of levity and naughtiness, and I loved it. Anyway, you flash forward 18 months from that and you get Eliminator, as you talked about off the top, and it's an MTV darling and it's ubiquitous. And here we didn't have MTV yet, and it was a couple of years before we got much music, so I must have watched these videos on Friday night videos or maybe even New Music, although I don't know whether they would have showed ZZ Top. But that record surrounded me. My point is, when I listened to Tube Snake Boogie, and then when I went through the Eliminator experience, ZZ Top struck me as a singles band. As ignorant as that may sound now, back then, you didn't really have context or history. And it's like, all these guys are a novelty act. They sang about Tube Snake Boogies, now they're singing about sharp-dressed men and legs with these beautiful chicks and all the rest of it. So I didn't consider them an album band until I met you, Martin Popoff. And in the early days when we were working on Metal Evolution, and ZZ Top would come up a fair bit, and you were a dyed-in-the-wool fan of theirs. And anytime I meet a huge fan, I often question my own attitudes about a band. Like, if someone loves them, and I respected you pretty much, even though we argued a lot, I knew this guy knows a lot. He's got a lot of knowledge, built a career around that. So I started to put my toe in a bit, and I guess I bought Tres Hombres, and that would have been the first one. And then I think I laid off for a while. And then, again, as sacrilegious as this sounds, flash forward to 2015, and I get hired to write the ZZ Top doc. And the upside of writing these things, when you don't really have a lot of knowledge of the band, is you take a crash course. So for me, I bought up all their records and dove headlong into the band. And when I came up from the surface, so all this is to say, when I talk about El Loco, even though I started this conversation by remembering me as a kid, I really started to understand ZZ Top only as an adult, as a guy in his 40s, late 40s, early 50s. So that's where it's coming from. So I don't have any of the baggage of understanding how they changed or didn't change or evolved or whatever. It's just my taste, why I love El Loco when it comes right down to it, if I'm totally honest. And like I said, that gives me a certain objectivity, I think, and dare I say maturity, and what am I trying to say? El Loco is an album that I have learned just through that ZZ Top experience again that people didn't really like, and it was baffling to me, in the sense that there was so much on the record that was still rooted in their past, but also in that post they took that break after Tejas, that's how you pronounce it, and came back with Degüello, and they had changed considerably. I thought, especially the sound of the records got so much better, but I think they had reached what they could do, what they started out with. I thought they arced to Tejas, and then they took that break, and they did reinvent themselves. One of the things that was laid out about El Loco is that it wasn't a particularly heavy record. And I don't know if whether you and I talked about that, and a lot of people I've read online, what you said notwithstanding, it was not just a departure, but almost a betrayal of their core principles, of their sound. And but heaviness has never been something that has particularly been something that means a whole lot to me. Although I recognize it and I enjoy it, whether something is heavy or not, or isn't heavy, doesn't matter to me. It's whether the songs are there. And I think about La Futura as an example, and you and I talked about this being kind of a heavy record, thick, heavy record. And some of those later records, Rhythmine as well. But I never found, or haven't found, the songs on those records, especially La Futura, as engaging as I did on El Loco. So again, so much of my love of El Loco is because I think the songs are great. I think at the end of the day, whether it's Billy or whether it is Hill, Beard, Gibbons, or whether that's a brand concoction, I don't know. Whatever songwriting muse that was around them at that point was, in my mind, to borrow a car motif, was firing on all cylinders. It's eclectic, it's fearless, it's progressive, it's direct, but it's also one of the funniest and invigorating and enjoyable records. And I'll break that down. Why is that? So, as I said at the top, it feels like the last album, and I say this because it adds to the enjoyment of it, and what makes it so great is the last ZZ Top album where they're all playing together. Now, they might be playing in different rooms at whatever studio they were at. I can't remember whether they did that in Memphis but there's no question when you listen to that album, there's very little programming on it. It's just three guys playing. The difference is between the earlier stuff is they're tackling more and more crazy styles, and I'll relay an anecdote. When we interviewed Frank at his place in Lake Travis, and none of this I think made it into the movie, but I had written out a bunch of songs that I wanted Frank to listen to and just comment on. And we gave him a radio and with a CD, I think it went. I can't remember the technology we used, but we sat by his pool, and he had this radio in his hand, and he sat and listened to it, a whole song, and then we just asked him about it. And I really, really enjoyed it. And whether it was good filmmaking, I don't care. It was good. But we got chatting about El Loco and how it's been largely lost because it got stuck between the comeback of Degüello and the excitement of something like Cheap Sunglasses, which, for me, that could be their greatest piece of work that encapsulates everything I love about them. And Degüello, for me, is an album that's got some serious majors, like hugely important and fantastic songs, but then subjectively, arguably, some filler. Well, El Loco doesn't have the highs of Cheap Sunglasses, I don't think, but it's a far more consistent and varied, and as I said, interesting record, and therefore much more satisfying than, and then certainly the commercial juggernaut that was Eliminator as well. But what struck me when we were hanging out was his enthusiasm for El Loco, which caught me by surprise. And he said a lot of things which caught me by surprise. You know, he was aware of those dreadful remixes that came out. But I guess I wasn't prepared for him when I played Heaven, Hell, or Houston, which is on the second side, for him to get so excited about that and be able to talk about it so explicitly. And the memories of it were so vivid. And I tell you, Martin, talking to him about any record after El Loco, my experience, he didn't really have any investment or fondness or anything really of weight. And there was a reason why, when I was writing that film, and I said to Sam Dunn, you know, we have to really stop this film at Eliminator for the most part. That is their peak, but for a lot of reasons, ZZ Top is never the same after that. And like I said, I'd argue they were never the same after El Loco. But, you know, one of the things that's popularly laid out about El Loco, and I know I'm going all over the place, but that is connected, is it? And even I think ZZ Top, as many bands, they buy into, for a variety of reasons. I've met a lot of musicians in my time, and you'll ask them about a certain album, and they'll just parrot what the media has said about it for years and years and years. They'll say the same thing, as if they just stopped thinking about it. They don't have the energy, so if the press said it was this, then it was this. So El Loco is treated as a transition record. Well, they were transitioning, and that's what Frank said to me that day. El Loco leads the way to Eliminator. And, you know, I don't agree with that. I think Eliminator is the beginning of a completely new phase of that band. And sure, Lyndon Hudson's there. Sure, there's some synthesizers, albeit not a lot, but on and a bit of electronic percussion on El Loco. Largely, to me, El Loco finishes what DeGuayo started, which is new directions, new influences, new tones and sounds, but it's the culmination of that post-break phase. So those two records, DeGuayo and El Loco, are buddies. Eliminator is something else. So I reject the natural or the widely held hypothesis that El Loco was a transition record. It was an endpoint album. And it reminds me, again, El Loco reminds me of a lot of records like Caress of Steel, Press to Play, It's Hard, that, again, had their history written for them. And unless you go back and listen to those records and read what was said about them at the time, but really it's a personal thing. You go back and take them as they are, I think you'll hear that El Loco has nothing to do with Eliminator. So I offer this, again, this alternate viewpoint that, again, that El Loco is the culmination of a band finding new influences. In that sense, it reminds me, dare I say, of Moving Pictures, which is kind of the yang to the yin of Permanent Waves. So those influences you heard in Rush with Ultravox and the Police that really started with Permanent Waves come to fruition or develop more deeply with Moving Pictures. And then Signals veers, the band does change. So, you know, if Rush's Vital Signs is the Police is the band doing kind of a Police thing, maybe, or you can go back to the Beatles doing Sun King, and that's them doing Fleetwood Mac. It's ZZ Top freely exploring their influences, but remaining unique and not this commercial juggernaut. They still sound like a band searching for interesting sounds. I mean, a lot has been written about Eliminator, how it was very conscious in its beats per minute, how they attempted to make a very successful album. And without denigrating the songwriting too much of that record, it always felt like we're going to make a really successful record, more than we're going to write a bunch of great songs. El Loco wasn't that. So, and Eliminator was the beginning of the brand in my mind. El Loco, there was no brand. It was still just three guys. So what you have on this last album, what you hear is Dusty and Frank, really well recorded, never buried. And why the record isn't recognized just for that last great album where you hear that rhythm section. And both Degüello and El Loco, I think, are beautifully recorded sounding records. And it's magical to hear those guys. And I'll get into kind of a song by song thing, but the mixes on this record are fabulous, especially it's a wonderful headphone album. The other thing I want to say, which seems like I'm reading a lot into it, but let me get the record again, is this cover, the happiness, let me get this, the happiness of this cover, the jovial, they never went back to this again. They never went back to that fun. You know, the irony is, and you see it in the movie I wrote and the narrative of, with Eliminator and the videos, they become cartoon characters and larger than life. But again, there was something very calculated about that. They had a director come in. All that was created by all sorts of different people. This to me is still the rawness of ZZ. Three guys going, what? We're crazy. It's just who we are. Yeah. It's a naked piece of art in that sense. And it warms my heart staring at that cover because they would never return to it. They would have their faces either cartooned or distorted or in shadow. And I think part, to sound slightly conspiratorial, is because the band became less and less about those three guys and more about a business. Anyway, so to talk about the record itself, and I want to break down some of it. I said Tube Snake Boogie was, I said a lot about that, but the thing about that record now, when I listen to it, again, I listen to the mix of it, especially right off the top where the toms are placed and the bass drum are placed, and the space between that bass drum and those drums, and how the rhythm guitars sit on the extreme left and right channel. Again, very interesting, exciting record making. And I wanted to say something else, actually. So bear with me. It was about, I was listening to Tejas. All right, maybe I'll get to it later. Oh, yeah. I said that Degüello didn't have a major, or sorry, El Loco didn't have a major song like Degüello. But also, you could ask yourself, there's a guitar solo on Tejas on the song Enjoy and Get It On, which is to me one of the most extraordinary solos Billy Gibbons has ever done. Is there something as great on El Loco that way? I don't know. That's debatable, but there are some incredible solos where he will change tones in mid-beat, or he'll, not mid-beat, but mid-section, and I want to get to that. So Tube Snake Boogie, again, feast for production and mix. I want to drive you home. What struck me as interesting about, again, in retrospect about this song is that that's the production of Degüello pulled back, the polish dialed back. And you get that reverb on the opening chirp of the rhythm guitar, which just tells you again. You said off the top about Bill Ham's production, whether it actually was him or Terry Manning and, you know, I never got to talk to Bill. And I know that post the breakup between Bill and the band, Bill was, I don't know, maybe you know more than me, but I never really was able to understand what Bill added or didn't do. So part of me does take the credit as, well, Bill must have had some say in this because there's a lot of these great production touches on this record.
How about 10-foot pole?
10-foot pole. Well, you know, El Loco doesn't invent Billy as a multifaceted vocalist, but arguably, I think he expands his range on this album more than any other record. And I would venture to say, apart from the songcraft and the solos, if side one of El Loco is about anything, it's about Billy as a singer. While side two is more overtly experimental musically. And also on 10 Foot Pole, which I love, is how steady Frank is on this. Sometimes he verges on like Jackie Leaps It from Can, you know, he's just there over and over. And it's such a contrast. I was listening to Fandango and Rio Grande Mud the other day, where he's a busy dude. And on this, he's so disciplined. I love it. And it really, I think, enhances the off-the-wall solo that Billy does on this. Nothing extraneous, though, from Frank. He's just all groove on this. Leela, well, it's almost a fully grown, blown country ballad.
Yep.
And arguably the band's first legitimate ballad. Now, one could quibble whether that is an art form they should be exploring. I think they should be, but, you know, his falsetto voice and that steel guitar and, you know, the lonesome old heart. And again, why I love El Loco is that new ground, not calculated, just indulging in influences and flexing creative muscles. And this is the thing about that era, that post-sabbatical era. That's what it was about. And you can argue that they took the sound, as I said earlier, that they started with the first album to its natural conclusion. But if that sabbatical was about Frank dealing with his addictions and Dusty dealing with his, and also wanting to plant his feet back on the ground by getting a real job, legend has it Billy goes all over the world, and goes to Paris, he goes to the Caribbean, he goes to Europe, India, in search of inspiration and sounds and all the rest of it. And I think, in my mind, this album is far more of a demonstrative of a musician pushing himself creatively. And as I said earlier, not just listening to bands, but listening to sounds and absorbing them and putting them in. Don't Tease Me. You know, I always thought ZZ Top, you know, there are real politics within that band in my mind about, it was obviously Billy's band. Billy and Bill Ham, they dictated what when. And sometimes that was great and they achieved great things, I think, with that access, but other times they maybe didn't utilize things they could have a little more. And one of them is the twin vocalist thing on Don't Tease Me. And, you know, you could easily, I'm always fascinated by bands who don't pick up on this, but you could easily recast this song as a man and a woman, as a duet between a man and a woman in a binary universe, which I mostly inhabit still. But Dusty seems to be taking the female part on this, and the two characters are having this conversation, which again is new to me. It was a new ground, an exciting ground. And when you listen to the totality of their catalog, that's cool. And production touches. If you listen closely to the rhythm guitar during the verses, and then you listen to the rhythm guitar change in the chorus, the change of it, not only does the guitar, the rhythm change, the tone is different, but how he moves it in the stereo, it's just one of those neat little things where you think, wow, that's cool. Again, someone's thinking. These aren't earth-shattering moments, but they are cool moments that remind you that the band were after something. It wasn't just laying it down. They were twirling knobs. They were thinking about things. Subtle percussion from Frank, tambourine on the 2 and the 4, just neat touches. And side 2 was such a great, it had a big ballad, it's got new wave pieces, comedy numbers, and then just classic ZZ Top. And the side 2 really shows the band's compositional and musical virtuosity in my mind. It's So Hard, probably another one where people think, what the hell are they doing? But to me, what I loved about them is it's an amalgam of ZZ, and it almost feels like the Drifters are in there, and Dire Straits, oddly enough. These are and you know, it didn't surprise me later that Mark and Billy talked about Mark trying to use Billy's guitar tone on Money for Nothing. And in terms of the Drifters and doo-wop and that vibe that it just stinks of, that song in a good way. It didn't surprise me that later or recently that Billy worked with Dion the Belmonts. So that's in his DNA. And that to me is where it popped out. And never have I heard Billy sound like, the whole thing about Billy is myth and artifice and trickery. And am I telling you the truth or am I lying? It's up to you. That kind of stuff that he does, that people feed off of, that gives me no pleasure, especially when you're trying to write a movie about them. But this feels real, how he sings this, how naked he is, especially the break around the 3-minute mark and then the run out. And the other great thing about this that I want to say, but it's so hard, is during that run out, and this is something that got lost in Eliminator and never came back, is you can feel, whether it's actually happening, but you can feel the band speed up. You can feel the inertia and the push as they reach to the end of that song. There's no drum machines. There's no click tracks. It's a band playing like a band and feeding off the song. And that's El Loco. Good Christ. Understated synth, great backing vocals. Why this was, never released as a single. Maybe they would think, well, that's too far out. But you remix that, maybe you edit it a bit. And in any case, it's a beautiful piece of work. To me, they're long lost masterpiece. And then you get, Pearl Necklace, and to follow that, the audacity of following It's So Hard with Pearl Necklace, the humor of that in the sequencing, I just love. But to me, that's such a wonderful stab at new wave. And it reminded me of the Vapors turning Japanese in its production and approach and attitude. It's just great new wave sound, again, with that naughty innuendo and the way Billy sort of throws in these vocal interjections just give that a real spontaneous, live off the floor sound that, again, was so different after that, so mechanical after that in my mind. And then right at the end, you get this or the tone of the solo, this austere solo, and how that solo builds into something really frenetic. And then you have the wide stereo panning, and again, thinking, creating art. Another perfect piece of work on this record. Groovy little hippie pad. I just love this tune, and I don't, at the risk of just saying I love it, it's great, that's how I feel, but I want to just read what Frank said to me that day. He said, that song was foreshadowing, but this is him, so this is how he said it.
Yeah.
Playing a bass drum with my hand, playing things differently. I'm hitting a drum. It's like a sound that sounds like something splatting, and then beating on a floor tom with a stick. Or no, wait, it was a bass drum. And then he starts to sing the song a bit. And all these sounds that are moving in and out. And I love the modulation of the song. So that just underscores again, for me, a guy who is largely disconnected to most of that catalog, just his eyes lighting up. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Heaven, Hell, or Houston. Again, we talked about the jam and pitching the idea that I pitched to Billy about it. But Heaven, Hell, or Houston was one of the songs when I was asked to move this thing forward. I was asked to create a set list that I wanted. And the purpose of the jam, again, was not, I said earlier, to create a spine, but it was also, I picked each song to represent a moment in their history that would allow us, from an editing point of view, to go to that. So if the song was Cheap Sunglasses, we would talk about the post-break. If we would talk about that strange middle record that was El Loco, which was the narrative, Heaven, Hell, or Houston was the one I picked. Now, of course, that was one of the first things that Billy or whoever ixnayed. They weren't going to do it, which was a shame, because to me, again, it's such an intensely creative piece of work, as much as it sounds like a silly comedy number. And again, I go to Frank. He says there's 3 tempos in that song, and each one is related to the other. It starts out in 4/4 and then moves to 2/4, goes back to 2/4 and ends in 6/8. But mathematically, they're all the same tempo. And we wanted to do that. And it was crazy. it was, most anyone else would have spent 10 seconds on it. That's a funny idea, but we really worked on it. And Billy had this funny voice. He's one of the funniest guys you'll ever meet. Talking about improving my financial situation, all that. So we made this song, and Bill Ham hated the song. He hated it. It wasn't pure rock and roll or blues. It was complicated. And again, that just reminds me, I'm not just hearing things when I think this is not a band attempting to sell records. It's a band attempting to create art. Party on the Patio. Are we already there? Frank's Syndrome hits, fantastic. 2 separate guitar solos. But what I love about Party on the Patio is it, much like Tube Snake Boogie, introduces you to that record in inimitable ZZ Top style, humor, hook, boogieing, fun, again, a little naughty, but just really accessible, and everything you love about the band starts the record and ends the record. Heard the cops are coming, so we tried to jump the fence. Mary didn't make it. We haven't seen her since. Connie had another drink. Jimmy simply couldn't think. Billy G was passed out underneath the sink, but everyone's going to show for another Party on the Patio. What a wonderful way to end that record. No pretension. You and I talked about ZZ Top being a blues band without ever feeling blue. And to me, that's how this record ends with, I want to listen to the whole thing again. I want to listen to that whole journey. And like I said, side 1, singing and austerity and some experimentation, but songcraft. Side 2, just unfiltered, fun, crazy, real risk-taking, but they're going to end with, this is what we're about. So don't feel alienated. Just join us on this journey. And so the idea that El Loco would be a contrarian choice for ZZ Top fan, again, I guess it comes down to, and we saw a bit of this with some of the feedback with Styx, the Cornerstone, where people are so adamant as to what classic Styx is and what it isn't. And, we could argue till the cows came home about that, but the bands I love were made of artists who explored, who did what they did extraordinarily well. So Styx, Pieces of 8, stunning record. ZZ Top, Tres Hombres, stunning record. Or Rio Grande Mud, or any of those records. But there's so much more to these guys. Billy Gibbons was not exactly the easiest guy I felt to be around, but I never lost sight of what a brilliant bloody artist that guy is, and what a great band they were, and what an inventive and interesting drummer Frank is when he was allowed to be. And that's a great loss, as I said at the top of this. It's a great loss that we really lost Frank's personality after this record. And he may show enthusiasm for playing along to a synclav or whatever in other records. But if you want unfettered, pure, this guy wasn't just a sort of a tub smacker dude. Guy knows how to create nuanced parts and knew how to, and this was a band, again, and bear with me for a brief second. People talk about Ringo in disparaging ways. And one of the things I love about Ringo is he was with 3 songwriters, but really John and Paul, who are some of the most, if not the most progressive songwriters of the last 60 years. And that guy, as a drummer, was there every step of the way, recreating his sound, creating parts. Then if you think about Tomorrow Never Knows coming 18 months after I Want to Hold Your Hand, he totally reinvents himself as a player. And you're a musician, Martin. That's not easy to do. And I thought Frank, on this, we already knew what Frank could do through the whole albums. But on this one, I just think he outdoes himself. Just like Billy outdoes himself as a writer and as a singer, Frank is right there. And Dusty as well. I touch on drummers more because I am a drummer. So I hear that predominantly. But El Loco to me, 10 out of 10, the last great ZZ Top record, because it's the last band album and the last time they were really searching and finding.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've always put this album more or less in the middle of the pack, but I was quite surprised to see when I looked at some of the rankings out there that people had this pretty high. Ultimate Classic Rock had it at 4, Classic Rock History at 4, Society of Rock at 5, Best Ever Albums at 8, Chaos Spin at 4. And I almost was looking at this kind of like horrified and disbelieving, because it almost seems like, and this is probably actually true, that they did these lists long time ago because it's really fun to talk about ZZ Top. And so these are probably some of the earliest bands they ever did. But I'll have to say that on a lot of different ZZ Top discussions I've been in recently, El Loco has come pretty low.
Doesn't surprise me.
For me, I will put Recycler low. I will put Afterburner low, XXX fairly low, but I'll actually put XXX above El Loco, and the first 2 albums, the 2 Brown albums, fairly low. This one, the way I look at this record, I mean, I do find it very entertaining. I love the solos on it. And as I was going through this, I was surprised to hear, this was when I was playing a fair bit of lead guitar, and I learned most of the solos on this and on Tejas, actually. And I was just reveling in the solos. They're pretty easy to do. They're bluesy. They're scaly. But I love that about the record. Tube Snake, I'll just go through the songs quickly as well. Tube Snake Boogie, my memory of that is that was a real dance floor song. Back at this time, like that was one of the heavier songs that when you went out dancing, you would actually hear that. I Want to Drive You Home reminds me a little bit of TV Dinners on Eliminator. And I will say about this record, here's what I think about the production. To me, I always just facetiously call this their Steely Dan album. And to me, this is a very well-recorded conservative album. It's sober. It's missing the eccentricities of DeGuello and Tejas, which are fairly really interesting, delightfully recorded albums. But this one is a little more straightforward. And to my mind, I've grown into the idea that it actually is a little bit of a transition. Where I'm hearing that transition more than anything is the straightforwardness of the beats, like something very no nonsense, like Tube Snake Boogie or Pearl Necklace. Pearl Necklace is a very creative song. Tube Snake Boogie, I'm not as enamored with. I just love the chord sequencing and stuff on Pearl Necklace. I love that you called it kind of new wavy, but the straightforwardness of the beats and then the added percussion touches. So soon as you do that, it starts to feel like a slight electronic treatment of the production. And it's not really that, but it just sounds like they're dressing up the percussion just a little bit. So I am hearing that on it. I don't like Layla as a ballad. I like later ballads a little bit better, but I find this quite a maudlin melody. It is quite shocking, but It's So Hard is the other ballad, and it's my favorite song in the whole record. It's So Hard is incredible. Great song. And actually, most of side 2, I actually love all of side 2. Party on the Patio is a little bit too rote boogie, and this one reminds me. I know you brought up Vapors with Pearl Necklace. I'll bring up B-52s with this one because this one sounds like Rock Lobster to me. But I love Groovy Little Hippie Pat as well. Heaven, Hell, and Houston is or Houston is probably my second favorite song on it. And I love that thing that you read about Frank, because I'm thinking through my head, 2/4 and 4/4 are kind of the same thing, but I know what he means. It goes to halftime, full time, and then it does have that little 3/4 time little bit in it as well. So that is kind of cool about that song. What else? 10-Foot Pole is a really good song. The 2 I don't like very much are I Want to Drive You Home and Don't Tease Me, because to me those ones are just more or less kind of straight pop mode for them. It's not a ballad. It's not heavy. It's not rocky. It's not particularly interesting. I do like in Don't Tease Me how there is a modulation to the chorus. So they do key changes in some of these songs as well, which is kind of cool. I love how in Pearl Necklace, you've got the verse. The pre-chorus is different, but the chorus is the same as the verse, kind of thing, in terms of the music, which is kind of neat. In terms of what songs these guys played live, I mean, as expected, actually kind of a surprise. 10-Foot Pole they played lots and lots of times. It's like number 32 on their list of songs played, 214 times apparently in that ballpark. But Tube Snake Boogie, number 15, Pearl Necklace, number 23, 678 times they played Tube Snake Boogie. And I can understand that. I mean, it is basically 1981's version of Tush, I suppose, for them, or a little bit Lagrangey, but yeah, I think it's a pretty creative album, but I definitely don't like the non-heaviness of it. It's definitely that. It's got a lot of clean, watery, reverby sort of guitar sounds on it, which I'm not super crazy about. And again, the production is it's absolutely very conservative. In fact, this is a band that had some of the incredible modern production guitar sounds when you get later. When you hear, Greg Morrow, the way Greg Morrow's drums are captured on Rhythmine, or you hear the electronics of Antenna. There are some really neat sounds later on. I don't think they do a great job with the sounds on the much lauded Sounds albums of the 80s, Afterburner, Eliminator, and Recycler. Actually, Recycler I think is 1990, but this is a band who has a lot of really, really interesting productions, and I don't think this is one of them. I think this is basically them being quite sober about what they're doing in that respect. But yes, you do hear a little bit. So every time there's like a funny vocal or even just a whole funny arrangement like Groovy Little Hippie Pad or Heaven, Hell, or Houston, I immediately think DeGuayo. To me, DeGuayo is my favorite Bells and Whistles comedy album. And actually, that's quite high up the list for me of favorite albums by this band. But no, I'm not crazy on board with this record. Something is missing in it. I do hear the sort of drift, we're not sure what to do sort of thing. They don't talk about it particularly favorably out there. Obviously, yeah, it is the with these guys, I mean, with all rock stars, they will soon get clouded by thinking the diamond record they made is a masterpiece, right? And I think that's kind of fallen in with the. But I swear to God, I talked to Monty Connor about this as well, but every time I've talked to Billy, at some point I ramble on, rave about Rhythmine, and now he's started to say, yeah, Rhythmine's one of our better albums, and I told Monty, you know what, Monty, he's saying that because I've said that to him like at least 3 times, right? Because that's all it takes, right? It takes a few people to tell you something, right? Like just like 3 or 4 disparate times you've heard something. So now he's talking about the magnificence of Rhythmine, which is pretty cool. But I love Rhythmine a lot, and I love Mescalero a lot, and I agree with you about La Futura that it's a little weak, but yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of where I sit on this. I was very surprised to see how high it is ranked, but like I say, to tell you the truth, in all the conversations I've had recently, not too many people are ranking this pretty. I think it's going down out there in the world rather than going up out there in the world.
I guess, like I said, it was how I received the whole ZZ Top cast, again, context, but also I'm entirely comfortable being a contrarian about stuff like that. But I don't wear it as a badge of honor, because I do try to, like I said about DeGuayo, the high points of that to me are, there's no question, there's some extraordinary pieces of
Esther Be the One. Wow.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Sunglasses, you're right.
Yeah. But Hi-Fi Mama and She Loves My Autumn, some of those things, they don't resonate even close to the so-called weaker numbers of El Loco. So,
but Party on the Patio is your Hi-Fi Mama and She Loves Your Automobile on here, right? And so is Tube Snake Boogie. Tube Snake Boogie is that incredible, right?
Well, yeah, but again, contextually, like I said, the album goes to so many more places, and again, that's personal taste. I love albums that stylistically go to all these different places, and
it's cool there are no covers here, and there are 2 on DeGuayo.
And there's Dust My Broom and
Thank You,
and which I thought was interesting, that their big return is 1/5 of the record they didn't write, which always left me as kind of well, this one they're clearly composing with a whole bag full of ideas. So, you call the thing Steely Dan, and which is, I don't know if that's damning with faint praise, or because I don't remember. I'm not really a Steely Dan fan that much, other than the first record, which I think is a knockout. But then they fire the vocalist. I guess my feeling is I hear slickness on DeGueo. I hear something different at work. I hear, what is this song? What is the personality and the character of this song? And that's the production style we're gonna choose for it. I don't hear necessarily a uniformity in the same way maybe you do. The
reason I hear a higher element of slickness here is that I think on Tejas you get that super charming where three guys playing in a little matchbox sound, and then on DeGueo it's still small. There's still a smallness and a tightness to it. Here it's basically the correct version of, I mean, this is almost like an arena rock sound, but without the fuzz pedal. Everything else is, the drums are big. The drums are definitely not big on DeGueo. They're just beautifully captured, but it still sounds like a small room or a wood cabin or a matchbox. Not as far as Tejas, mind you. Tejas is unbelievable in that respect, right?
That's right. We have to agree to disagree on that, because I would say on the majors again of DeGueo, Cheap Sunglasses, the drums to me sound huge. That sounds like I'm in outer space when I listen to that song. I'm floating all over the world with that one. And to an extent, on Badam Nationwide, all those, we're two different people hearing two different things. And I would say the opposite. I believe they shrunk their sound down again for El Loco. And so we're hearing different things.
Okay, well, that's good. Let's end it on that. So big or small, let us know out there in the comments what you think of Ralph's treatise on this, and let us know what you think about this record. I feel sometimes that this whole thing about being contrarian, people accuse me of that because we started the show called The Contrarians, and all our first episodes where we were having contrarian choices. But I also don't wear it as a badge of honor. I'm fine to be a contrarian when I am, and obviously Rhythmine is a contrarian choice. But also I go with the consensus choice on a lot of bands as well. But yeah, let us know what you guys think in the comments below. We've got a Patreon situation. We've got merch, all that kind of stuff. Subscribe, follow, all that, whatever you're supposed to do with YouTube channels, please do that with us. And we will have Ralph back again another time. I actually don't know what that's going to be, but we're going to have that discussion right now as we sign off. So on behalf of Ralph and myself, thanks for listening.